The bullet shattered the lantern glass 6 inches from Beatrice Walker's head, and she knew the bank manager's son had finally decided that if he couldn't have her, nobody would. She dropped the mop handle and ducked behind the saloon's oak bar, her heart hammering against her ribs as another shot punched through the thin wooden wall of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Rhyolite, Nevada. It was August 1906, and the desert mining town was still riding the silver boom that had transformed it from empty scrubland into a bustling community of nearly 5,000 souls in just 2 years. Beatrice had arrived 6 months ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a mother's funeral to run from in Kansas, and she'd been scrubbing floors and washing glasses ever since, earning barely enough to rent a corner of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house attic. "Come out here, B." Thomas Garrett's voice slurred through the night air. He was drunk again, standing in the middle of the dusty street with his father's revolver. "Come out and talk to me proper." Beatrice pressed herself against the bar's base, her breath coming in short gasps. The saloon was empty at this late hour, the last customers having stumbled out 20 minutes ago. She'd been alone, finishing the cleaning that her employer, Mr. Dutch, required before she could leave for the night. Now she was trapped, and Thomas Garrett, the bank manager's entitled son, was outside with a gun because she'd refused his proposal for the 3rd time that week. "You think you're too good for me," Thomas shouted. "You ain't nothing but a poor scrubwoman." "My father says you're trash, but I was willing to overlook that. I was willing to make you respectable." Beatrice closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. It was always the same in this town, in every town. She was 20 years old, and everywhere she went, men either saw her as something to use or something to save, never just as herself. Thomas Garrett wanted her because she'd told him no, because she had blonde hair and blue eyes and a figure that drew attention even in her threadbare dress. He didn't know her, didn't care to know her. He just wanted to own something pretty. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. They were coming fast, multiple horses, and she heard Thomas's drunken cursing cut short. "Put the gun down, son." The voice was new, deep and calm, with an authority that made even drunk Thomas Garrett pause. "Whatever she did to offend you, I'm sure it doesn't warrant shooting up property that doesn't belong to you." "This ain't your business, stranger," Thomas said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "This is between me and the girl inside." "Well, seeing as how I just rode 3 days from Tonopah to deliver a herd to the stockyard here, and I was hoping for a drink before bed, I'd say you're making it my business by shooting holes in the only saloon that's still got its lights on." Beatrice risked a glance over the bar. Through the broken window, she could see 3 men on horseback silhouetted against the moonlit desert. The one speaking sat easy in his saddle, his hands resting on his thighs, nowhere near his gun belt. "You're drunk," the stranger continued. "And you're making a fool of yourself in front of your neighbors. Look around. See all those windows with folks peeking out. They're all going to remember this come morning. You want them remembering you as the man who couldn't hold his liquor and shot up the saloon over a girl. Or you want them remembering you as the man who showed good sense and went home to sleep it off." There was a long pause. Beatrice held her breath. "My father will hear about this," Thomas finally muttered. "I expect he will, Jeanite's son." The sound of Thomas's retreating footsteps made Beatrice's shoulders sag with relief. She stayed crouched behind the bar until she heard the saloon door swing open on its creaky hinges. "Miss, you all right in here?" Beatrice slowly stood, her legs shaking. The man who'd spoken was standing just inside the doorway, backlit by the street's gaslights. He was tall, she could see that much, with broad shoulders and a black hat in his hands. His 2 companions waited outside with the horses. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice trembled. "Thank you." He's been persistent lately, but tonight he was worse than usual. The man stepped forward into the lamplight, and Beatrice got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that needed cutting and sun-weathered skin that spoke of long days in the saddle. His eyes were brown and kind, set in a face that was more rugged than handsome, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, trail-worn and practical, and there was something solid about him, something steady that made her feel safe for the first time in hours. "Yates Orson," he said, nodding to her. "And you must be the cause of all that commotion." "Beatrice Walker," she replied, smoothing down her stained apron with trembling hands. "Though I didn't cause anything, I just wanted to be left alone." "I believe you," Yates said simply. He glanced at the broken window and the bullet holes in the wall. "This happen often." "Thomas Garrett has been bothering me for 2 months. His father owns the bank. They're important people here." Beatrice heard the bitterness in her own voice. "I'm nobody, just the girl who scrubs floors, but I won't marry a man I don't love, no matter how important his family is." Yates studied her for a moment, and she felt herself flush under his gaze. She knew what she must look like, her hair falling out of its pins, her dress old and patched, her hands red and raw from lye soap and hard work. "That takes courage," he finally said. "Saying no to security when you don't have much of it yourself." "Or stupidity," Beatrice said, bending to pick up the mop she dropped. "That's what Mrs. Henderson says. She owns the boarding house where I rent a room. She says I'm a fool for refusing Thomas, that a poor girl like me can't afford to be particular. Mrs. Henderson sounds like she's forgotten what it's like to be young. Mrs. Henderson says I'm too poor for any good man to want me without getting something in return. She says Thomas Garrett is the best I'm likely to do." Yates's expression darkened. "Mrs. Henderson is wrong." The simple conviction in his voice made Beatrice look up sharply. Yates was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You don't know me," she said. "I could be exactly what everyone says I am. Poor white trash who came here with nothing and will leave with nothing. I know you'd rather scrub floors than marry a man you don't love," Yates said. "I know you stood up to that drunk fool even though you were scared. I know you're still here finishing your work even though you just had a gun pointed at you. That tells me everything I need to know." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such simple respect. "I should finish cleaning up this glass," she said, her voice thick. "Mr. Dutch will dock my pay if I leave it. Let me help." Yates set his hat on the bar and immediately began picking up the larger shards of glass from the window. "My boys can wait a few more minutes for that drink." They worked in companionable silence for a while, Beatrice sweeping while Yates collected the broken glass in a bucket. Outside, his 2 ranch hands had dismounted and were checking the horses, their low voices carrying through the broken window. "You said you came from Tonopah?" Beatrice asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her racing thoughts. "Delivered 40 head of cattle to the stockyard here. We run a ranch about 60 miles northwest, near the California border. Small operation, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice, the quiet pride of a man who'd built something with his own hands. "We bring cattle here 4 times a year, sell them to the mining companies for beef." "That's a hard life," Beatrice said. "It is," Yates agreed, "but it's honest and it's mine. No man tells me what to do or who to be. That's worth more than easy living." Beatrice nodded, understanding completely. "That's why I left Kansas. My mother passed last winter, and my uncle said I could stay with his family if I'd marry his business partner. A man of 45 who'd already buried 2 wives. I took what little money I had and bought a train ticket west instead. That took courage too. Or stupidity, Beatrice said again, but this time she was almost smiling. The jury's still out. Yates straightened, dusting off his hands. The broken glass was cleaned up, the floor swept clean. Well, I think you're richer than you know, Miss Walker. Not in money, maybe, but in the things that matter. Courage, integrity, self-respect. Those things are worth more than all the silver in this town. Beatrice stared at him, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. That's a kind thing to say to a stranger. I don't say things I don't mean, Yates said. He picked up his hat and settled it back on his head. Now, my boys and I are going to have that drink I mentioned, and then we're going to sleep in the stockyard with our horses since it's too late to ride back tonight. But before I do that, would you let me walk you to your boarding house? Just to make sure that Garrett fellow isn't lurking around anywhere. Beatrice wanted to refuse on principle. She didn't need a man to protect her, didn't want to be beholden to anyone. But the fear from earlier still lingered, and she had to walk past dark alleys and empty lots to get to Mrs. Henderson's place. Yes, she said quietly. Thank you. She finished putting away the cleaning supplies and locked up the saloon with the key Mr. Dutch had given her. Yates's 2 ranch hands were waiting outside. A younger man of about 20 with red hair and an older Mexican man with a weathered face and kind eyes. Miss Walker, this is Charlie Sutton and Roberto Mendez, Yates said. Boys, Miss Walker here is going to accept our company on her walk home, and then we'll get that drink. Pleased to meet you, madam, Charlie said, tipping his hat. Roberto just nodded politely, his hands resting on his belt buckle. They walked through the quiet streets of Rhyolite, Beatrice in the center with Yates on her right, and the other 2 men keeping a respectful distance. The town was settling into sleep, though lights still glowed in many windows, and the distant sound of piano music drifted from the other saloons that stayed open all night for the miners working late shifts. How long have you been in Rhyolite? Yates asked as they walked. 6 months. I work at the saloon 5 nights a week and I take in washing during the day. I'm saving money to buy a ticket to San Francisco. There are more opportunities for women there, or so I've heard. San Francisco's a big city. You got people there? No. But I figure a big city has more use for someone willing to work hard than a mining town does. Here, there's only so many jobs for women. Saloon girl, laundress, boarding house keeper, or wife. I want more than that. What do you want? Yates asked, and he sounded genuinely interested. Beatrice thought about it. No one had ever asked her that before. I want to open a bakery. My mother taught me to bake, and I'm good at it. I want a little shop with my name on it where I make pies and bread and cakes. I want to be my own boss, to earn my own way. Is that foolish? No, Yates said firmly. That's a good dream. Clear and solid. You know how much you need to get started. I've been doing the math. With rent for a shop and supplies and living expenses until the business gets established, I'd need about $300. I have $47 saved so far, she laughed, but it was a bitter sound. At the rate I'm saving, I'll be 40 before I have enough. Things can change faster than you think, Yates said. 6 months ago, I was breaking horses for another man's ranch. Now I've got my own place and 3 hands working for me. Life has a way of surprising you. They reached Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a 2-story clapboard building that had seen better days. A light still burned in the front room, which meant the landlady was waiting up, probably to scold Beatrice for coming home late. This is me, Beatrice said, stopping at the gate. Thank you again, Mr. Orson. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did. Yates, he corrected. And you're welcome. Will you be all right? That Garrett fellow knows where you live. Mrs. Henderson doesn't allow men in the house, and she's got a shotgun she's not afraid to use. I'll be safe enough. Yates nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. "We'll be in town until noon tomorrow, settling accounts at the stockyard. If you need anything, that's where we'll be." "I'll be fine," Beatrice said, but she found herself reluctant to go inside. There was something about Yates Orson that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. He looked at her and seemed to see past the threadbare dress and work-worn hands to the person underneath. "Good night, then," Yates said, tipping his hat. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Beatrice Walker, even under such strange circumstances." "Good night, Yates." She watched him walk away with his companions, their boot heels echoing on the wooden sidewalk. Then she squared her shoulders and went inside to face Mrs. Henderson's disapproval. The landlady was waiting in the front parlor, her gray hair in curling papers and her sour face set in its usual expression of disappointment. "You're late. There was trouble at the saloon. Thomas Garrett was drunk and shooting his gun. Some cowboys helped calm him down, and then I had to clean up the broken glass." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Thomas Garrett was shooting at you, near me. Not at me exactly. That boy's sweet on you. You ought to encourage him instead of filling his head with refusals. His father owns the bank, girl. That's security. That's a future." "I don't love him," Beatrice said tiredly. This was an old argument. "Love," Mrs. Henderson snorted. "Love doesn't put food on the table or a roof over your head. Love doesn't keep you warm when you're old. Thomas Garrett could give you a good life, but you're too proud to see it. You think you're better than you are, girl. You're just a poor nobody with no family and no prospects. You'd best remember that before all your opportunities pass you by." Beatrice bit back the sharp retort on her tongue. She needed this room, needed the roof over her head while she saved her money. "I should get to sleep. I have washing to do in the morning before my shift at the saloon." "You do that," Mrs. Henderson said, "and think on what I said. Pride's a luxury poor folk can't afford." Beatrice climbed the narrow stairs to her attic room, a space barely large enough for a cot and a small trunk that held all her worldly possessions. She changed into her nightgown and lay down, but sleep was elusive. Her mind kept replaying the evening, Thomas's drunken threats, the fear she'd felt crouching behind the bar, and then Yates Orson's calm voice cutting through it all. "You're richer than you know." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Everyone else saw only what she lacked, but Yates had looked at her and seen value. It was a strange feeling, warm and unsettling and hopeful all at once. She fell asleep thinking about brown eyes and a steady voice, and for the first time in months, her dreams were peaceful. The next morning dawned hot and clear, the desert sun beating down on Rhyolite's dusty streets with relentless intensity. Beatrice rose early as she always did, heating water on Mrs. Henderson's stove to wash herself before beginning her rounds. She had 3 clients who paid her to do their laundry, mostly miners who'd struck it rich enough to afford the luxury. It was brutal work, hauling water and scrubbing clothes on a washboard until her hands ached, but it brought in an extra $1 a day, which went straight into her savings jar. She was hanging sheets to dry behind the boarding house when she heard the commotion from the street. Raised voices, angry and getting louder. Beatrice's stomach clenched. She recognized one of those voices. Thomas Garrett appeared around the corner of the house, his face blotchy and his eyes red-rimmed from drinking. His father was with him, Albert Garrett, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked at Beatrice with the same disdain he might show a stray dog. "There she is," Thomas said, pointing. "There's the girl who's been leading me on for months." "I have never led you on," Beatrice said, keeping the clothesline between them. "I've told you no every time you asked. That's the opposite of leading on." "My son has made you a generous offer," Albert Garrett said, his voice cold and clipped. Multiple offers, in fact. He's been willing to overlook your poverty and lack of family connections. And this is how you repay his kindness, by humiliating him in front of the entire town. I didn't humiliate anyone, Beatrice said, her heart pounding. Thomas humiliated himself by getting drunk and shooting up the saloon. Because you drove him to it with your teasing ways, Albert snapped. You're nothing but a common tease girl. You smile at my son to keep him interested, then refuse him to keep him chasing. I know your type. You're hoping to drive the price up, make him desperate enough to offer you more than you're worth. That's not true. Beatrice felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. A small crowd was gathering, other boarding house residents and passers-by drawn by the raised voices. I don't want anything from your son. I've told him that clearly. You want what every girl of your station wants, Albert said. Money and status you haven't earned. But let me make something clear to you, Miss Walker. You are not good enough for my son. You will never be good enough for my son. And if you had any decency, you'd stay away from him instead of flaunting yourself where he can see you. I work for a living, Beatrice said, her voice shaking. I don't flaunt anything. I just want to be left alone. Then perhaps you should leave Rhyolite, Albert said. I'm sure Mrs. Henderson would agree that your presence here is becoming troublesome. Especially if she knew that some of her other lodgers were concerned about the sort of attention you attract. The threat was clear. Albert Garrett could pressure Mrs. Henderson to evict her, and the landlady would do it without hesitation if it meant keeping the bank manager's goodwill. You can't do that, Beatrice said, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. I can do whatever I want, Albert said. I own the bank, girl. I hold the notes on half the businesses in this town, including the Silver Dollar Saloon where you work. One word from me and Mr. Dutch will find a new girl to scrub his floors. One word and Mrs. Henderson will have your belongings on the street. You are nothing here. You have no power, no influence, no protection. So I suggest you think very carefully about how you conduct yourself going forward. He turned to leave, gripping Thomas's arm to pull him along. Thomas looked back at Beatrice with a mixture of longing and resentment that made her stomach turn. That's enough. The voice came from behind the Garretts, and Beatrice's heart jumped. Yates Orson stepped into the yard, his hat in his hands and his expression hard. Charlie and Roberto were with him, standing slightly behind him with their arms crossed. This is a private conversation, Albert Garrett said, turning to face Yates with cold eyes. It doesn't concern you, Cowboy. When you threaten a lady in public, it concerns any man with a shred of decency, Yates said. I heard what you said to Miss Walker, and I'm here to tell you it stops now. Or what? Albert's lip curled. You're nobody, just some drifter passing through. I could have the sheriff run you out of town before nightfall. You could try, Yates said calmly. But before you do, you should know that I just sold 40 head of cattle to the Rhyolite Mining Company for top dollar. Cash money, sitting in an account at the Bank of Goldfield because I don't trust your bank, Mr. Garrett. And I've got friends who run bigger herds than mine, friends who'd be interested to know how the bank manager in Rhyolite treats people who can't fight back. Miners Cooperative in Tanapa has been looking for a reason to move their business away from your institution. I'd be happy to give them one. Albert Garrett's face went pale, then red. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you how things stand, Yates said. You want to throw your weight around with people who can't defend themselves. That's between you and your conscience. But you're not doing it in front of me without hearing some truth in return. Miss Walker has done nothing wrong. Your son's behavior last night was disgraceful, and instead of addressing that, you're here bullying the victim. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. How dare you? Albert sputtered. Papa, let's just go, Thomas muttered, looking uncomfortable. The crowd had grown larger, and people were murmuring, some nodding in agreement with Yates. Albert Garrett looked around at the watching faces and seemed to realize he was losing the crowd. "This isn't over," he said to Yates. "You've made an enemy today, Cowboy." "I can live with that," Yates said. The Garretts left, Albert practically dragging his son down the street. The crowd began to disperse, people heading back to their business with backward glances and whispered conversations. Beatrice realized she was gripping the clothesline so hard her knuckles had gone white. She forced herself to let go to breathe normally. "Are you all right?" Yates asked, approaching her slowly as if she were a spooked horse. "You shouldn't have done that," Beatrice said, but there was no heat in it. "Albert Garrett isn't a man you want as an enemy. He really does control half this town." "Then half this town needs to stand up to him," Yates said. "What he said to you was wrong, Beatrice. You know that, right?" "I know what I am," Beatrice said quietly. "I'm nobody important. I have no family, no money, no connections. Everything he said was true." "Everything he said was cruel," Yates corrected. "There's a difference between truth and cruelty. You're a young woman trying to make an honest living and save for a better future. That's admirable, not shameful. And anyone who tries to make you feel small for it is the one who should be ashamed." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry more around Yates Orson than she had in months, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of being seen, of being defended. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know why you keep helping me. You don't owe me anything." "I don't help you because I owe you," Yates said. "I help you because it's the right thing to do, and because I like you, Beatrice Walker. I liked you from the moment you stood up from behind that bar last night with fire in your eyes, refusing to be cowed. I like your courage and your dreams and your stubbornness. I like that you'd rather scrub floors than compromise yourself. Those are qualities worth defending." Beatrice's breath caught. The way he was looking at her, steady and sincere, made her feel things she'd never felt before. Not the nervous excitement Thomas Garrett's pursuit had generated, but something deeper and warmer and infinitely more valuable. "I like you too," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "But that doesn't change anything. I'm still poor. You're still leaving. And Albert Garrett is still going to make my life miserable here." "Then maybe you shouldn't stay here," Yates said. "I can't afford to go anywhere else yet. I need more time to save money." "Or," Yates said slowly, as if the idea was just forming as he spoke, "you could come with me." Beatrice stared at him. "What? Come to the ranch?" "I need help, Beatrice. My boys and I were terrible cooks. We live on beans and bad coffee and hardtack. And the house is a mess because none of us know the first thing about keeping one. I can pay you a fair wage, more than you're making here. You'd have your own room, meals provided. You could save money faster and you'd be away from the Garretts. You're offering me a job." Beatrice's mind was reeling. "I'm offering you a way out," Yates said. "Look, I know we just met. I know this sounds sudden. But I'm a good judge of character, and I think you're exactly what the ranch needs. Someone practical and hardworking who won't put up with nonsense. And I think the ranch might be what you need too. A safe place to work and save money without men like Thomas Garrett making your life hell." "People would talk," Beatrice said. "A woman living on a ranch with 4 men. "Let them talk," Yates said. "Anyone who matters will see you're there to work, same as any ranch hand. And anyone who doesn't see that, well, their opinion isn't worth worrying about." It was a wild idea, impractical and sudden and probably foolish. But as Beatrice looked at Yates's earnest face, she found herself wanting to say yes. What did she have in Rhyolite? A tiny room in a boarding house run by a woman who despised her. A job scrubbing floors in a saloon. The constant threat of Thomas Garrett and his father's vindictive power. No friends, no future, just endless work for pennies. What would I do at the ranch? She asked. Besides cooking, I mean. Whatever needs doing, Yates said. Cooking, cleaning, mending clothes. Maybe help with the chickens if we get some. The garden if you want to plant one. It's hard work, but honest. And you'd be treated with respect, Beatrice. I give you my word on that. Any man who doesn't treat you proper will answer to me. Beatrice thought of Mrs. Henderson's disapproving face, of Albert Garrett's threats, of the endless monotony of her current life. Then she thought of open spaces and honest work, and the way Yates looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. When do you leave? She asked. This afternoon, soon as we settle our accounts. We'd get to the ranch by tomorrow evening if we ride steady. I need to give notice to Mr. Dutch at the saloon, and I need to collect my things from the boarding house. Is that a yes? Yates asked, and there was hope in his voice that made Beatrice's heart skip. It's insanity, Beatrice said. I barely know you. This could be the worst decision I ever make. But I think you're right. I think I need to leave Rhyolite, and this is the opportunity to do it. So yes. Yes, I'll come work at your ranch. The smile that broke across Yates's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. You won't regret this, Beatrice. I swear you won't. I hope you're right, Beatrice said, but she was smiling too. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just running away. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice went to the Silver Dollar Saloon and found Mr. Dutch sweeping up the last of the broken glass from the night before. He took her resignation with a shrug, already calculating how quickly he could replace her. He paid her the wages he owed her, less than she'd expected because he docked her pay for the broken window, even though it wasn't her fault. Mrs. Henderson was equally indifferent to her leaving. Running off with a cowboy you just met, the landlady sniffed. I knew you'd come to a bad end, girl. Don't come crying back to me when it all falls apart. I won't, Beatrice promised, packing her few belongings into a worn carpetbag. Everything she owned in the world fit into that single bag. 2 dresses, a spare set of undergarments, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, and her jar of savings. $47.30, every penny earned through backbreaking work. She met Yates and his men at the stockyard at noon as arranged. They'd bought supplies for the journey, including a gentle mare for Beatrice to ride. This is Rosie, Yates said, patting the horse's neck. She's old and steady, won't give you any trouble. I've never ridden much, Beatrice admitted. Just a farm horse when I was a girl. You'll remember quick enough, Yates said. And we'll take it easy, no need to rush. They left Rhyolite in the early afternoon heat, riding northwest through the desert scrubland. Beatrice sat awkwardly in the saddle at first, conscious of Charlie and Roberto riding behind her and Yates beside her. But as the miles passed and Rhyolite disappeared behind them, she began to relax. The desert stretched out endlessly in all directions, dotted with creosote bushes and Joshua trees, mountains rising purple in the distance. The sky was impossibly blue and vast, and the silence was broken only by the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of leather. "How far to the ranch?" Beatrice asked after they'd been riding for an hour. "About 60 miles, Yates said. "We'll camp tonight near Willow Spring, get there tomorrow evening. You doing all right?" "I'm fine," Beatrice said, though already her legs were starting to ache from the unfamiliar position. "Tell me about the ranch. What's it like?" "Small," Yates said. "Just 160 acres, but it's good grazing land with a spring that runs year-round. The house is nothing fancy, just 4 rooms, but it's solid. Built it myself last year after I saved up enough to buy the land. Got a barn and a corral and a shed for equipment. We run about 60 head of cattle, sell them 4 times a year to the mining companies. It's not a big operation, but it's growing. How did you end up out here? Beatrice asked. Where are you from originally? Montana, Yates said. My father had a ranch up there, but when he died, my older brother inherited it all. That's how it works with the firstborn. So I came south looking for land I could afford. Found this place 3 years ago when I was working as a drover. Spent 2 years breaking horses and saving every penny, then bought the land and built the house. Charlie came on a year ago, Roberto 6 months after that. We've got another hand, Sam, who's watching the place while we're gone. You've built something to be proud of, Beatrice said. I've built something that's mine, Yates said. That's what matters. When you grow up knowing everything will go to your older brother, you learn real quick that if you want something of your own, you have to make it yourself. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Beatrice found herself studying Yates from the corner of her eye, noticing small things. The easy way he sat his horse, the careful way he scanned the horizon, the gentle tone he used when speaking to the mare. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, confident without arrogance, strong without brutality. What made you stop last night? Beatrice asked suddenly. When you heard Thomas shooting, you could have just ridden on. It wasn't your problem. Yates considered the question. My mother used to say that if you have the power to help someone and you don't, that's a choice that defines you. I had the power to stop a drunk fool from hurting someone, so I did. Simple as that. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She passed when I was 17. Fever took her. My father was never the same after. Died 6 months later of what the doctor called heart failure, but I think it was just a broken heart. He loved her that much. I'm sorry, Beatrice said softly. It was a long time ago, but I learned from watching them that real love is rare. The kind of love where 2 people truly see each other and choose each other every day, not just in the beginning but year after year. That's what I want someday. That or nothing. Is that why you're not married? Beatrice asked, then flushed. I'm sorry, that was too personal. It's all right, Yates said. And yes, that's why. I've met plenty of women who were interested in a man with his own ranch, but I could always tell they were interested in the security, not in me. I want what my parents had. I want a partner, someone who'll stand beside me through the hard times, not just enjoy the good ones. I'm willing to wait for that, even if it takes the rest of my life. Beatrice's throat felt tight. That's rare, a man who thinks like that. Maybe, Yates said. Or maybe most people just settle for less than they deserve, because they're afraid of being alone. But I figure being alone is better than being lonely in a marriage with the wrong person. They camped that night near a spring surrounded by willow trees, the first real vegetation Beatrice had seen in hours. Charlie and Roberto set up camp with practiced efficiency, while Yates helped Beatrice down from her horse. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, stiff and sore from the long ride. First day in the saddle is always the hardest, Yates said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Tomorrow will be easier. Tomorrow I won't be able to walk, Beatrice said, but she was smiling. They ate beans and hardtack around the campfire, and Beatrice saw what Yates meant about their cooking skills. The beans were scorched and the coffee was too weak, but she was too tired to complain. As darkness fell and the desert cold set in, she wrapped herself in a blanket Yates provided and sat close to the fire, staring up at stars more numerous and bright than she'd ever seen in town. It's beautiful out here, she said quietly. Lonely, but beautiful. It grows on you, Yates said from his spot across the fire. When I first came out here, I hated the emptiness. Now I can't imagine living anywhere else. There's something honest about the desert. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Charlie and Roberto had already rolled into their bedrolls, leaving Yates and Beatrice sitting on opposite sides of the dying fire. The silence between them was comfortable, easy in a way that surprised Beatrice. She'd known this man less than 24 hours, but somehow it felt longer, as if she'd known him for years. "What will people think?" she asked suddenly. "At the ranch, I mean, when you show up with a woman you just met." "Sam won't care," Yates said. "He's practical. He'll just be happy to have decent food for a change. And the neighboring ranchers, well, they mind their own business mostly. As long as the work gets done and everyone's treated fair, they don't care much about the rest." "What about you?" Beatrice asked. "What do you think about me being there?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, his face half shadowed by the firelight. "I think I'm glad you said yes. I think this is going to work out better than either of us expects, and I think you're already braver than you give yourself credit for. Taking a chance on a stranger, leaving everything you know behind, that takes guts. Or desperation," Beatrice said. "Maybe both," Yates allowed, "but I'm still glad you're here." They sat in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts, until Beatrice's exhaustion finally won out, and she crawled into her own bedroll near the fire. She fell asleep to the sound of coyotes howling in the distance and the gentle crackle of burning wood, feeling safer than she had in months, despite being in the middle of nowhere with 3 men she barely knew. The next day's ride was, as Yates had predicted, both easier and harder. Easier because Beatrice was getting the hang of riding again. Harder because new muscles were sore in ways she hadn't anticipated. But the landscape was changing as they rode, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills and more vegetation. They passed a small ranch around midday, and Yates stopped to water the horses and introduce Beatrice to the owners, an older couple named Frank and Sarah Mills, who looked at her with curiosity but no judgment. "New housekeeper," Yates explained simply. "Beatrice Walker, meet Frank and Sarah Mills. They run the neighboring spread to ours." "Pleased to meet you," Sarah said, shaking Beatrice's hand with a firm grip. She was a weathered woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of practical clothes that spoke of hard work. About time Yates got someone to manage that house of his. Those boys live like animals left to themselves. "Now, Sarah," Frank protested, but he was smiling. "It's true and you know it," Sarah said. "Miss Walker, you need anything at all, you come find me. We're just 4 miles south of Yates's place. I know what it's like to be the only woman on a ranch surrounded by men. You'll want another woman to talk to sometimes." "Thank you," Beatrice said, grateful for the offer. "I might take you up on that." They reached Yates's ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that took Beatrice's breath away. The ranch sat in a shallow valley with hills rising on 3 sides and open grazing land stretching to the south. The house was exactly as Yates had described it, simple but solid, built of wood with a covered porch and a shingled roof. The barn was larger than the house, and Beatrice could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. A man emerged from the house as they rode up, tall and lean with blonde hair and a suspicious expression. This must be Sam, the hand Yates had left in charge. "About time you got back," Sam said, then stopped short when he saw Beatrice. "Who's this?" "This is Beatrice Walker," Yates said, dismounting and moving to help Beatrice down from Rosie. "She's going to be keeping house for us and handling the cooking. Beatrice, this is Sam Brennan. He's been with me since the beginning." Sam looked between Yates and Beatrice, his expression unreadable. "Keeping house?" "That's right," Yates said, his voice taking on a warning edge. "She's an employee, same as you. I expect her to be treated with respect." Something passed between the 2 men, a silent communication that Beatrice couldn't quite interpret. Then Sam nodded slowly. "Understood." "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Walker." "Thank you," Beatrice said, though she could feel the tension in the air. Yates showed her inside while the other men took care of the horses. The house was indeed a mess, exactly as he'd promised. Dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen. Dust covered every surface, and the smell of unwashed men and stale coffee permeated everything. But beneath the mess, Beatrice could see the good bones: sturdy furniture, a large stone fireplace, windows that would let in plenty of light once they were cleaned. "Your room is through here," Yates said, leading her to a small bedroom off the kitchen. It held a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand, simple but clean. "I had the boys air it out yesterday and put fresh sheets on the bed. There's a lock on the door. I want you to use it. Not because I don't trust my men, but because I want you to feel safe here." "Thank you," Beatrice said, setting her carpet bag on the bed. Her savings jar clinked inside, and she made a mental note to find a better hiding place for it. "Why don't you rest a bit?" Yates suggested. "It's been a long ride. We'll fend for ourselves for dinner tonight." "You can start fresh tomorrow." But Beatrice shook her head. "If I'm here to work, I should start now. Besides, I saw what you call food. Let me at least make something edible for dinner." Yates smiled, that warm sunrise smile that made her stomach flutter. "All right, if you're sure. I'll get Sam to show you where we keep everything." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Beatrice took stock of the supplies, which were basic but adequate: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, dried apples, and onions. Not much to work with, but she'd managed on less. She set a pot of beans to soak and made biscuits from scratch, the familiar motions of kneading dough soothing her nerves. While the biscuits baked, she fried salt pork and made gravy, simple food but done properly. When she called the men to dinner, their expressions of surprise and delight at the sight of a real meal made her laugh despite her exhaustion. They ate in near silence, too busy shoveling food into their mouths to talk, and Beatrice found herself pleased by their obvious enjoyment. "Miss Walker," Sam said after cleaning his plate for the second time, "if you cook like this every day, you can stay as long as you want." "Told you she was what we needed," Yates said, looking at Beatrice with unmistakable pride. That night, alone in her small room with the door locked as Yates had suggested, Beatrice sat on the edge of her bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 2 days. She'd left Rhyolite, left Nevada, and taken a job on a remote ranch with a man she barely knew. It was reckless and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful nature. But as she looked around her clean, simple room and thought about the meal she'd cooked and the gratitude in those men's faces, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: useful, valued. Like she was building something instead of just surviving. Through the thin walls, she could hear the low murmur of the men's voices as they talked on the porch, the sound comfortable and companionable. She thought about Yates's steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he'd defended her without hesitation. She thought about his words: "You're richer than you know." Maybe he was right. Maybe wealth wasn't just about money. Maybe it was about having work you could take pride in, people who treated you with respect, and the courage to take chances on better things. Beatrice fell asleep with a smile on her face, her dreams filled with open skies and honest work and brown eyes that saw her as she truly was. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Beatrice found surprisingly satisfying. She rose with the sun, started coffee and breakfast, and had food on the table by the time the men came in from their morning chores. After they rode out to work with the cattle, she spent her days cleaning the house room by room, washing clothes, mending tears in shirts and pants, and planning meals with the limited supplies available. It was hard work, harder in some ways than the saloon had been, but it was different. At the silver dollar, she'd felt invisible, just another pair of hands doing thankless work for people who didn't care. Here, every improvement she made to the house was noticed and appreciated. Every good meal brought genuine compliments. The men treated her with respect, almost with reverence, as if they couldn't quite believe their luck in having her there. Yates was especially attentive without being overbearing. He made sure she had everything she needed, asked her opinion on ranch decisions, and spent his evenings on the porch with her after the other men had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his dreams for the ranch, his hope to expand the herd and maybe add horses to the operation. He learned about her bakery dreams, her mother's recipes, her father who died when she was 12 and left them with nothing. "You said you wanted to open a bakery in San Francisco," Yates said one evening about a week after her arrival. They were sitting on the porch steps watching the sunset, a nightly ritual that had developed naturally. "But there's no reason it has to be San Francisco. You could open one anywhere." "I'd need a town big enough to support it," Beatrice said. "Somewhere with enough people to buy bread and pies regularly." "What about Tonopah? It's a good-sized mining town growing fast, and we go there 4 times a year anyway with the cattle. I could help you scout locations, maybe talk to some folks I know there." Beatrice looked at him in surprise. "You'd help me do that? Why wouldn't I? It's your dream. Dreams are worth fighting for. Most men would say a woman's place is keeping house, not running a business." "Most men are fools," Yates said simply. "You're smart and hardworking and talented. You should do whatever makes you happy." It was conversations like these that made Beatrice's feelings for Yates grow deeper and more complicated. She'd come to the ranch planning to save money and leave, but increasingly she found herself not wanting to go. Not because the ranch held her, but because Yates did. She found herself looking forward to their evening talks, to the way his face lit up when he saw her, to the careful way he treated her as an equal and a friend. But she was also afraid. Afraid of reading too much into his kindness. Afraid of letting herself hope for something more than friendship. Afraid of being hurt the way her mother had been hurt by loving a man who'd left her with nothing when he died. About 2 weeks after her arrival, Beatrice was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard raised voices from outside. She wiped her hands and went to the window, peering out to see 2 riders approaching the house. Her heart sank when she recognized one of them. Albert Garrett from the Rhyolite Bank. She heard Yates's voice, calm but firm. "Mr. Garrett, what brings you all the way out here?" "I think you know exactly what brings me," Albert said, dismounting. His companion, a rough-looking man Beatrice didn't recognize, stayed on his horse. "You've got something that belongs to Rhyolite." "I've got a housekeeper who works for me," Yates said. "That's all." "That girl ran out on debts," Albert said. "She owes Mrs. Henderson for her last week's rent. She owes Mr. Dutch for damages to his saloon. I'm here to collect what's owed." Beatrice's stomach clenched. She didn't owe anyone anything. She'd paid Mrs. Henderson through the end of the week, and Mr. Dutch's damaged window wasn't her responsibility. This was just Albert Garrett trying to punish her for refusing his son. She pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. "I don't owe you anything, Mr. Garrett. I paid my rent. And your son's the one who shot up that saloon, not me." "There you are," Albert said, his eyes cold. "I've come to take you back to face your obligations." "She's not going anywhere," Yates said, moving to stand beside Beatrice. Sam, Charlie, and Roberto had appeared from the barn, forming a loose semicircle behind Yates. "You can't keep her here against the law," Albert said. "I'm not keeping her anywhere," Yates said. "She's a free woman who chose to work here. She doesn't owe you money, and she's not going back to Rhyolite." "My son wants her," Albert said, and now the real reason for his visit came out. Thomas is making himself sick over this girl. I've decided that if she marries him properly, I'll forgive all her debts and settle a generous sum on her. It's more than fair." "I don't want your son's money," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with anger. "And I don't want your son. I've made that clear from the beginning." "You'll change your tune when you see the alternative," Albert said. "I can make life very difficult for you, girl, and for anyone who harbors you." "That sounds like a threat," Yates said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's a promise," Albert said. "I have connections, Cowboy. I can make it so no mining company will buy your cattle. I can make it so no bank will extend you credit. I can make it so you lose everything you've built here." "No, you can't," said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Sarah Mills riding up on her horse, Frank beside her. The older woman dismounted with surprising agility and walked straight up to Albert Garrett. "I heard you rode this way," Sarah said. "Thought I'd come see what mischief you were stirring up, and I heard every word of that speech just now. Threats, intimidation, trying to force a woman into marriage she doesn't want. That's criminal behavior, Mr. Garrett. This doesn't concern you, Mrs. Mills." "It concerns me when you threaten my neighbors," Sarah said firmly. "And it concerns my husband, who sits on the board of the Miners Cooperative. You know, the organization that controls which banks the mining companies use for their payroll. Frank, didn't you tell me just last week that the board was considering moving their accounts away from Garrett's bank?" Frank Mills nodded slowly, catching on to his wife's play. "That's right. There's been concerns about some of Mr. Garrett's business practices. If those concerns were confirmed, well, I imagine the board would act quickly." Albert Garrett's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." "Try me," Sarah said. "You ride back to Rhyolite right now and leave Miss Walker alone, and this conversation never happened. But if you keep making threats, if you try to interfere with Yates's business or Miss Walker's freedom, then Frank and I will make sure every rancher and mine owner between here and Tanapa knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your choice." The standoff lasted nearly a minute, Albert Garrett's face cycling through rage, calculation, and finally resignation. "This isn't over," he said, but it was clear he was defeated. "Yes, it is," Yates said. "Go home, Mr. Garrett. Tell your son to move on. Beatrice has made her choice." Albert mounted his horse with poor grace and rode off with his companion, leaving dust in their wake. Beatrice felt her knees go weak with relief, and Yates steadied her with a hand on her arm. "Thank you," she said to Sarah and Frank. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." "We look after our own out here," Sarah said warmly. "And you're one of us now, dear. Besides, I've been wanting to take Albert Garrett down a peg for years. He's a bully who's used his position to hurt too many people." After the Millses left, Beatrice went back inside to finish her bread, but her hands were shaking. Yates followed her into the kitchen. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I brought trouble to your door," Beatrice said. "Albert Garrett meant those threats. He could really hurt your business." "Sarah Mills meant her threats too," Yates said. "And she's got more real power than Garrett does. The mines need beef more than I need any particular buyer. There's always another market. Still, I'm sorry. You've been nothing but kind to me, and this is what I bring you, problems." Yates took her flour-covered hands in his, ignoring the mess. "Beatrice, look at me." When she did, his brown eyes were intense, serious. "You haven't brought me problems. You've brought light to this house. You've brought laughter and good food and conversation that mean something. You've made this place feel like a home instead of just a house where 4 men sleep between work shifts. If standing up to Albert Garrett is the price I pay for that, it's a bargain." "Why are you so good to me?" Beatrice whispered. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you're not willing to give," Yates said. "Right now, I want you to stay here and feel safe and work toward your dreams. That's all. If someday you want to give me more than that, if someday you want to stay for reasons beyond just work, well, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't hope for that. But I'm not going to pressure you or expect anything. You've had enough of men doing that. Beatrice's heart was pounding. You're saying you have feelings for me. I'm saying I'm falling in love with you, Yates said simply. I have been since that first night when you stood up from behind that bar with dust on your cheek and fire in your eyes. But I also know you've been hurt and threatened and pushed around by men who saw you as property. So I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to let you set the pace. I'm willing to be whatever you need me to be, whether that's an employer or a friend or someday, if I'm lucky, something more. Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. No man had ever spoken to her like this before, with such honesty and respect and genuine care. I have feelings for you too, she admitted. I've been trying not to, trying to be practical, but every day I'm here, every conversation we have, I fall a little more, and it terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? Because I have nothing to offer you, Beatrice said. I'm still that poor girl with no family and no prospects. You deserve someone better, someone who brings something to a partnership besides debts and trouble. You're doing it again, Yates said gently, measuring your worth in money and connections instead of character. Beatrice, you're the strongest, bravest, most capable woman I've ever met. You left everything you knew to chase a better life. You refused to compromise yourself even when it would have been easier and safer to give in. You work harder than most men I know. You're kind and funny and talented. That's what you bring to a partnership. That's what I want. I'm scared, Beatrice whispered. Me too, Yates admitted. Loving someone means risking getting hurt, but I think you're worth the risk, and I hope you'll eventually think I'm worth the risk too. He released her hands and stepped back, giving her space. No pressure, he said again. Like I said, I can wait. Now I should let you finish that bread before the dough overrises. He left her alone in the kitchen, and Beatrice stood there for a long moment, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Then she went back to her bread, kneading the dough with steady hands while her mind raced. That evening, she asked Yates to take a walk with her after dinner. They walked out past the barn to a small rise that overlooked the ranch, the setting sun painting everything gold. I need to tell you something, Beatrice said, gathering her courage. About what I want. All right, Yates said, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets, patient as always. I came here planning to save money and leave, to use this as a stepping stone to something else, but I don't want that anymore. Beatrice took a deep breath. I want to stay, not just as your housekeeper, but as someone building a life here, with you if you'll have me. Yates went very still. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I love you, Beatrice said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. I'm saying I want to see where this goes. I'm still scared and I still have dreams I want to chase, but I want to chase them with you beside me. If that's something you want too. Yates turned to face her fully, his expression a mixture of joy and disbelief. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated. I'm sure, Beatrice said. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about something. Yates reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. Then yes, he said softly. Yes, I want that more than anything. I love you, Beatrice Walker. I think I loved you from the moment I met you. That was less than 3 weeks ago, Beatrice said, but she was smiling through tears. Sometimes you just know, Yates said. My parents knew each other 2 months before they got married. They had 30 years together and loved each other every single day. Time doesn't matter when it's right. Are you proposing to me? Beatrice asked, her heart skipping. Not yet, Yates said. Not until you're absolutely certain. Not until you've had time to be sure this is what you want. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be ready. But Beatrice was already sure. She'd spent her whole life being careful, being practical, protecting herself from hurt. And where had it gotten her? Alone and miserable in Rhyolite, scrubbing floors and dodging unwanted advances. Yates Orson was offering her something completely different: partnership, respect, love freely given with no strings attached. He was offering her a future built on honesty and mutual support. "I don't need more time," she said. "I know what I want. I want you. I want this life. I want to build something together." Yates searched her face for a long moment, looking for doubt or hesitation. When he found none, his smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then marry me," he said. "Marry me and be my partner in everything. We'll build this ranch together. We'll save for your bakery together. We'll face whatever comes together. What do you say?" "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and Beatrice felt something inside her finally settle. This was home. Not the house or the ranch, but this man who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. This man who treated her dreams as important as his own. This man who defended her without hesitation and waited patiently for her to find her courage. When Yates kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Beatrice felt like she was finally where she belonged. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Millses' ranch, with Sarah standing up for Beatrice and Frank officiating. Charlie, Roberto, and Sam served as witnesses, along with a few neighboring ranchers who'd become friends. It wasn't a fancy wedding. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her make, and Yates wore his best shirt and pants, freshly brushed. But when they exchanged vows in front of the fireplace in the Millses' parlor, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, Beatrice felt like the richest woman in the world. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together as partners rather than employer and employee. They moved Beatrice's things into Yates's room, and she learned to sleep beside another person, to share space and decisions and plans. But mostly it was easy, as natural as breathing. They worked side by side during the day and talked on the porch each evening, and at night they held each other and dreamed about the future they were building together. Beatrice continued keeping house and cooking, but now she also worked with the accounts, her neat hand and mathematical mind proving invaluable in tracking expenses and profits. She learned about ranching, about cattle breeding and grass management and water rights. Yates taught her to ride better, to rope, even to shoot, insisting she should be able to defend herself and the ranch if necessary. In return, Beatrice taught him about her world. She taught him to appreciate good cooking, not just functional food. She brought beauty to the house with wildflowers in jars and curtains. She sewed from fabric ordered from a catalog. She brought conversation and laughter and music, singing while she worked in a clear voice that made the men stop to listen. Winter came and went, cold and harsh but manageable. They huddled by the fire in the evenings, and Yates read aloud from the books Beatrice ordered. Novels and poetry and newspapers that kept them connected to the wider world. Spring brought new calves and the hard work of branding, and Beatrice learned to help with that too, holding calves steady while the men worked, proving she was tougher than she looked. It was in late spring, almost a year after they'd met, that Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. When she finally told Yates, sitting on their porch as the sun set, he went very still. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're having a baby." "Yes," Beatrice said, watching his face carefully. "In late autumn, the doctor in Tanapa thinks. Are you happy?" "Happy." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. Beatrice, I'm more than happy. I'm overwhelmed. I'm terrified. I'm so grateful I can barely speak. A baby, our baby. You'll be a good father, Beatrice said, certain of it. You're patient and kind and strong, everything a child needs. I hope so, Yates said. I want to give our child what my parents gave me, love, security, a home they're proud of. We will, Beatrice promised. Together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the hot summer months, though Beatrice found the desert heat harder to bear as she grew larger. Sarah Mills became a frequent visitor, bringing advice and baby clothes and the companionship of another woman who understood what Beatrice was going through. The men, especially Yates, treated Beatrice like she was made of glass, hovering anxiously and trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. I'm pregnant, not dying, Beatrice protested when Yates tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I can still do my work. You could rest more, Yates said. You don't have to do everything. I need to feel useful, Beatrice said. I need to stay busy. If I sit around thinking about what's coming, I'll drive myself crazy with worry. Yates understood that, so they compromised. Beatrice continued her regular work, but accepted help with the heavier tasks. She also began planning seriously for her bakery, using the pregnancy as an impetus to finally pursue that dream. They'd saved enough money between them to make it possible, and Tanapa was growing fast enough to support a bakery. In September, when Beatrice was 7 months along, they made a trip to Tanapa to scout locations. They found a perfect spot on the main street, a small storefront with room for an oven and display cases, and a small workroom in back. The rent was reasonable, and the location was ideal, situated between the miners' boarding houses and the business district. We could make this work, Beatrice said, standing in the empty space and imagining it filled with the smell of fresh bread. We could really do this. Then let's do it, Yates said. We'll sign the lease, order the equipment, and set it up. You can open next spring after the baby's born and you've had time to recover. You're sure? Beatrice asked. It'll be expensive and there's no guarantee it'll succeed. I'm sure, Yates said. This is your dream, Beatrice, and I want to help you make it real. They signed the lease that day, a partnership between them with both their names on the contract. Beatrice Walker Orson, proprietor, the paper read, and seeing her name in print like that as a business owner made her feel like she was finally becoming the person she'd always wanted to be. The baby came in late October, a long and difficult labor that left Beatrice exhausted and Yates pale with worry. But when Sarah Mills finally placed the squalling infant in Beatrice's arms and announced, "It's a boy," all the pain was forgotten in a rush of overwhelming love. "A son," Yates said, his voice breaking as he looked down at the tiny red-faced baby. "We have a son." They named him Thomas after Beatrice's father, with the middle name Yates for his father. Little Thomas Yates Orson had his mother's blue eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both his parents completely. The first months of Thomas's life were exhausting and magical in equal measure. Beatrice had never been so tired, but she'd also never been so happy. Yates was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas during fussy nights and changing diapers without complaint. He moved the cradle into their room, so Beatrice could feed the baby without having to get up fully, and he learned to recognize the different cries that meant hungry or tired or uncomfortable. When Thomas was 3 months old and Beatrice was starting to feel human again, they began preparing to open the bakery. Yates hired another hand to help at the ranch, so he could spend more time in Tanapa helping Beatrice. They installed ovens and shelving, painted the walls a cheerful yellow, and ordered supplies. Beatrice tested recipes in the ranch kitchen, perfecting her mother's old formulas and developing new ones. The bakery opened in April of 1908, almost 2 years after Beatrice and Yates had first met. They called it simply Walker's Bakery, keeping Beatrice's maiden name for the business to avoid confusion. On opening day, a line formed before dawn, miners and families and business owners all curious about the new establishment. Beatrice sold out of everything by noon that first day. Bread, rolls, biscuits, pies, and cakes all gone. She worked from 3 in the morning until late afternoon, with Yates helping however he could and little Thomas sleeping in a cradle in the back room. It was exhausting and exhilarating and everything she dreamed of. "You're really doing it," Yates said that evening as they counted the day's receipts. "You're making it work." "We're making it work," Beatrice corrected. "I couldn't do this without you. You're as much a part of this as I am." The bakery quickly became a Tanapa institution. Miners stopped by every morning for fresh bread and coffee before their shifts. Families ordered cakes for special occasions. Restaurants contracted with Beatrice to supply their daily bread. Within 6 months, the bakery was profitable enough to hire help, a young woman named Margaret who had dreams of becoming a baker herself. Beatrice began dividing her time between the ranch and the bakery, spending 3 days a week in Tanapa and 4 at home. It wasn't always easy, balancing motherhood and business ownership and marriage, but Yates made it possible. He never complained about the irregular schedule or the nights when she fell into bed exhausted. He just supported her, encouraged her, and took up the slack wherever it was needed. By Thomas's 2nd birthday, the bakery was successful enough that Beatrice could afford to hire a manager, someone to handle the daily operations so she could spend more time at the ranch. She chose Margaret, who'd proven herself capable and trustworthy. Beatrice still did the baking 3 days a week and handled the business side, but she was no longer run ragged trying to do everything herself. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch thrived under Yates's careful management, the herd growing larger each year. The bakery brought in steady income and gave Beatrice the independence she'd always craved. Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler, curious and energetic and deeply loved by everyone who met him. When Thomas was 3, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, more confident in her ability to handle both a baby and her other responsibilities. Yates was thrilled, already imagining a house full of children running around the ranch. "You think it's a girl this time?" he asked, his hand resting on Beatrice's still flat stomach. "Does it matter?" Beatrice asked. "No," Yates said. "Healthy and happy, that's all I want." Their daughter arrived in June of 1910, in the middle of a heat wave that made the labor seem even more difficult than it had been with Thomas. But when Sarah placed the baby girl in Beatrice's arms, Beatrice felt that same overwhelming rush of love she'd felt with her first child. They named her Claire Elizabeth Orson, and she had her father's brown eyes and her mother's blonde hair. Thomas, now almost 4, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding. "Gentle," Beatrice would remind him constantly as he tried to pet Claire's head like she was a puppy. But Thomas was careful, more careful than most children his age, and he took his role as big brother seriously. With 2 children, the juggling act became more complex. Beatrice cut back her time at the bakery to 2 days a week, trusting Margaret to handle more of the responsibilities. The ranch remained the center of their lives, the place where they were all together, and Beatrice found she didn't miss the bakery as much as she'd thought she would. The business was successful and running smoothly without her constant presence, which meant she'd achieved her real goal: independence and financial security, yes, but also the freedom to live life on her own terms. By 1912, 6 years after that fateful night when Yates had stopped Thomas Garrett from shooting up the Silver Dollar Saloon, Beatrice sometimes had to remind herself that her life was real and not some beautiful dream. She had a husband who loved and respected her, 2 healthy children, a successful business, and a home she'd helped build. She was no longer the poor girl scrubbing floors in Rhyolite. She was Beatrice Orson, ranch co-owner and business proprietor, mother and wife. One evening, as she and Yates sat on their porch watching the sunset while Thomas and Claire played in the yard, Beatrice said, "Do you remember what you told me that first night, when you cleaned up the broken glass at the saloon?" "I said a lot of things," Yates said, smiling. "You said I was richer than I knew," Beatrice said, "that I had courage and integrity and self-respect, and those things were worth more than money." "I remember," Yates said, "and I was right." "You were," Beatrice agreed, "but I didn't understand it then. I thought wealth was just about money, about having enough to feel safe. I didn't realize that real wealth is about love and partnership and building something meaningful. I didn't realize that the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most to lose." "And now?" Yates asked. "Now I understand," Beatrice said, reaching for his hand. "I have everything worth having, you, our children, this life we've built together. That night in Rhyolite I thought I had nothing, but I was wrong. I had courage and dreams and the strength to choose a hard path over an easy one. And those things led me here to you, to this. I'm the richest woman in the world, Yates, not because of the bakery or the ranch, but because of the life we've made together." Yates squeezed her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you, Beatrice Orson." "I love you too," Beatrice said. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for believing I was worth taking a chance on." "Best decision I ever made," Yates said. "Stopping at that saloon, defending you, bringing you home. Best decision of my life." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, their children's laughter ringing through the evening air. Beatrice thought about how far she'd come from that frightened girl crouching behind a bar, convinced she had no value because she had no money. She thought about all the people who'd told her she was too poor for any good man, that she should settle for whatever scraps of security she could find. They'd been wrong. She hadn't been too poor for a good man. She'd been too rich for the wrong men, rich in all the ways that mattered but that shallow people couldn't see. And Yates had seen it immediately, had recognized her value when everyone else saw only her poverty. That recognition had saved her, but more than that, it had freed her to become fully herself. With Yates, she didn't have to pretend or diminish herself or apologize for her dreams. She could be ambitious and soft, strong and vulnerable, independent and partnered. She could be all the complicated, contradictory things that made her human. Life at the ranch continued its steady rhythm over the following years. The cattle operation expanded as Yates had hoped, and they added a small horse breeding program that quickly proved profitable. The bakery remained successful, with Margaret eventually buying into it as a partner, giving Beatrice more freedom to focus on her family while still maintaining ownership and a share of the profits. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and spent his days following his father around, learning everything about cattle and horses and land management. Claire was more like her mother, practical and independent, and she showed an early talent for numbers that suggested she might someday take over the business side of their various enterprises. In 1914, when Thomas was 6 and Claire was 4, Beatrice found herself pregnant again. This time it was twins, 2 boys they named Henry and Samuel, and the ranch house suddenly felt much smaller and much louder. But it was a happy chaos, filled with love and laughter and the endless activity of a growing family. Yates proved to be as patient with 4 children as he'd been with one. And Beatrice watched with a full heart as he taught his sons and daughter about integrity and hard work and treating others with respect. He was the kind of father she'd always hoped her children would have: present, engaged, and endlessly supportive. The years passed peacefully, marked by small triumphs and the occasional challenge, but mostly by the steady accumulation of good days. They added on to the house to accommodate the growing family. The bakery opened a second location in Goldfield. The ranch became known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and horses. Through it all, Beatrice and Yates remained true partners, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams and nurturing the love that had brought them together. They still took their evening walks when they could steal the time, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same appreciation and respect they'd felt from the beginning. When Thomas turned 18 in 1924, preparing to take over more responsibility on the ranch, Beatrice realized with some surprise that she and Yates had been married for nearly 18 years. It seemed impossible. Where had the time gone? But then she looked around at the life they'd built, the children they'd raised, the business they'd created, and she understood. The time had gone into living, into building something worth having. You ever regret it? She asked Yates one evening as they sat on their porch, gray now threading through his dark hair and laugh lines crinkling around his eyes. Taking a chance on that poor girl from Rhyolite, every single day, Yates said solemnly. Then he grinned. I regret that I didn't do it sooner. That I didn't meet you earlier, that we didn't have even more time together. We have time, Beatrice said. We have all the time in the world. Then I'm the richest man alive, Yates said, echoing the words he'd spoken so long ago. Because I have you. They sat together as the sun set over their land, over the life they'd built from nothing but courage and love and hard work. Beatrice thought about that frightened girl she'd been, hiding behind a bar and convinced she had no value. She thought about the man who'd seen her clearly and loved what he saw. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, to this porch, to this life, to this moment of perfect contentment. She'd learned so much over the years. She'd learned that wealth wasn't measured in money, but in relationships, in meaningful work, in children who knew they were loved, in a partner who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She'd learned that dreams were worth fighting for, and that the best dreams were the ones you built with someone else. Most of all, she'd learned that Yates had been right that first night. She had been rich all along, rich in all the ways that mattered. She just hadn't known it yet. It had taken a cowboy with kind eyes and a steady voice to help her see her own worth, to help her become the woman she was always meant to be. And now, sitting beside him with their children's voices drifting through the evening air and the land they'd built together stretching out before them, Beatrice knew she was exactly where she belonged. She'd come so far from that attic room in Rhyolite, from the fear and uncertainty and poverty. But in another sense, she'd always had everything she needed. She just needed someone to help her see it. The years continued to unfold with grace and blessing. Claire, following in her mother's footsteps, took over full management of the bakery when she was 22, expanding it to 3 locations and developing a wholesale business that supplied restaurants throughout Nevada. Henry and Samuel, the twins, had different interests. Henry loved ranching as much as his older brother Thomas, and worked alongside him and their father. Samuel, more intellectual, went to university in San Francisco and became a lawyer, though he returned to Nevada to practice and remained close to the family. Thomas eventually married a rancher's daughter from Goldfield, a smart and capable woman named Martha who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch land, expanding the operation while staying connected to the main family. Their children, Beatrice and Yates's grandchildren, brought new life and laughter to the ranch. Claire married later, to a merchant in Tanapa who understood and supported her business ambitions. They had no children but built a successful partnership that mirrored her parents in many ways. Henry married a schoolteacher who brought education and culture to the ranch community, teaching not just her own children but any child in the area who wanted to learn. Samuel married his college sweetheart and settled in Carson City, but they visited often, bringing their children to learn about ranch life. Through all of this, Beatrice and Yates remained the heart of the family, the steady center around which everyone else orbited. They aged gracefully together, their hair going gray and their movements slowing but their love remaining constant and true. They took pride in what they'd built, not just the material success but the family they'd created, the values they'd instilled, the love they'd nurtured. In 1936, 30 years after they'd met, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren gathered, along with neighbors and friends they'd accumulated over the years. Sarah and Frank Mills, now elderly but still sharp, raised a toast to the couple who'd proven that love built on mutual respect and shared values could last a lifetime. To Yates and Beatrice, Frank said, his voice wavering with age but strong with conviction, who showed us all that real wealth isn't found in a bank vault, but in the lives we build and the people we love. May we all be as rich as they are. The assembled crowd raised their glasses, and Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks. She looked at Yates, who was looking back at her with that same appreciation and love she'd seen in his eyes 3 decades ago. His hair was white now, his face lined with age, but his eyes were the same, warm and steady and full of devotion. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Orson," he said quietly for her ears alone. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Orson," she replied. "Thank you for 30 years of making me feel rich." "Thank you for 30 years of being right," Yates said, smiling. "You were always richer than you knew." They danced that night under the stars, slowly and carefully because their joints weren't what they used to be, but with the same joy and connection they'd always shared. Their children and grandchildren watched and learned what love looked like after 30 years, what partnership meant when it was built on respect and honesty and genuine caring. Beatrice knew she was lucky. Not everyone got a love like this, a partnership that lasted and deepened and remained true through decades of life's ups and downs. Not everyone found someone who saw them clearly and loved what they saw. Not everyone had the courage to take chances on better things when the safe path was right there, easy and comfortable and soul-crushing. But she had taken that chance. She'd refused to settle for Thomas Garrett's resentful infatuation or Mrs. Henderson's grim pragmatism. She'd had the courage to say no to a life that would have been safe but empty. And that courage had led her to Yates, to this life, to this perfect moment of dancing under the stars with the man she loved, and the family they'd created watching with smiles and tears of their own. As they aged into their 70s, Beatrice and Yates gradually handed over more responsibility to their children, stepping back to enjoy the fruits of their decades of hard work. They traveled a bit, taking a train to San Francisco to see the city Beatrice had once dreamed of moving to. They laughed about how different her life would have been if she'd gone there, instead of to Yates's ranch, and they were grateful every day for the choices they'd made. They spent most of their time at the ranch, though, sitting on that same porch where they'd spent so many evenings talking and dreaming and building their life together. They watched their grandchildren grow, passing on stories and wisdom, and the values that had guided their own lives. They remained involved in the community, respected elders whose opinions were sought and valued. In the spring of 1942, as Beatrice approached her 70th birthday, she fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from Tanapa, but there wasn't much he could do. Antibiotics existed now but weren't widely available yet, and Beatrice's age worked against her. The family gathered, children and grandchildren filling the house with worried faces and quiet prayers. But Beatrice wasn't afraid. She'd lived a full life, rich beyond measure. She'd achieved her dreams and created new ones. She'd been loved deeply and had loved in return. She'd built something lasting and meaningful. Yates sat beside her bed day and night, holding her hand and talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. He told her stories of their life together, reminding her of their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of each child, the 1,000 small moments that had made up their decades together. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered on what would be her last evening. The family had left them alone for a few moments, and she wanted to make sure Yates heard what needed to be said. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me the richest life imaginable. You gave it to yourself," Yates said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I just had the good sense to hold on when you came into my life. You were always the brave one, Beatrice, always the strong one." "We were strong together," Beatrice corrected. "That was our secret. We made each other better." "You made me better," Yates said. "You made everything better." "I love you," Beatrice said. "I'll love you forever. In whatever comes next, I'll find you again." "I love you too," Yates said. "More than words can say. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Beatrice closed her eyes, content. She'd said what needed saying. She'd lived the life she wanted. She'd loved and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask for? She slipped away peacefully in her sleep that night, with Yates beside her and her family in the house she'd helped build. She was 70 years old, and she'd spent 36 of those years as Beatrice Orson, wife and mother and business owner and partner. She'd spent 36 years being rich in all the ways that mattered. Yates lived another 5 years after Beatrice's death, staying at the ranch and helping Thomas and Henry with the operation until his own health began to fail. He never remarried, never even considered it. He'd had his great love, the kind of partnership his parents had shared, and he knew how rare and precious it was. He wasn't going to try to replace something irreplaceable. He spent his final years telling stories to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, making sure they knew about the remarkable woman who'd come into his life that night in Rhyolite. He told them about her courage, her dreams, her refusal to settle for less than she deserved. He told them how beautiful she'd looked that first night, standing up from behind the bar with fire in her eyes. He told them how she'd transformed the ranch from a house into a home, how she'd built a successful business through hard work and determination, how she'd raised 4 children to be good, capable, compassionate people. Most of all, he told them what he'd told her that first night, that real wealth wasn't about money. It was about character, courage, integrity, love. It was about building something meaningful with your life and sharing it with people who mattered. "Your grandmother was the richest person I ever knew," he'd say. Not because of the bakery or the ranch, though those things were impressive, but because she knew how to love fully, how to work honestly, how to dream big and then make those dreams real. She knew what mattered in life, and she never let anyone convince her otherwise. When Yates died peacefully in his sleep in 1947, he was buried beside Beatrice on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. Their children erected a simple stone marker that read, "Yates Orson and Beatrice Walker Orson, partners in life and love, rich beyond measure." The The ranch continued under Thomas's management, then eventually passed to his children, keeping the family legacy alive. Claire's bakery empire eventually expanded to 6 locations and became a Nevada institution, known for quality and fair business practices. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren spread out across the West, but they all carried with them the lessons Yates and Beatrice had taught through their example. Years later, when the great-grandchildren would ask about their ancestors, about how the family fortune had been built, the story always came back to that night in Rhyolite. To a poor girl scrubbing floors and a cowboy with steady eyes who saw her worth when no one else did. To courage and dreams and the willingness to take chances on better things. To the understanding that real wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. They said she was too poor for any good man, those people in Rhyolite. They measured her worth in dollars and found her lacking. But the cowboy said, "You're richer than you know," and he was right. She was rich in courage, in integrity, in the strength to build a life worth living. And together, they proved that those riches were worth more than all the silver in Nevada, more than all the money in all the banks in all the world. Their story became family legend, told and retold through generations, a reminder that real worth isn't measured in material things but in character, in love, in the life you build, and the people you share it with. It was a story about seeing clearly, about valuing what matters, about having the courage to choose a hard path over an easy one, because the hard path leads somewhere worth going. It was a story about being rich in all the ways that matter, and about finding someone who helps you see that richness in yourself. It was a love story, pure and simple, the kind that happens once in a lifetime if you're very, very lucky. The kind that starts with a moment of courage and builds into something lasting and beautiful and true. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with 2 people sitting on a porch watching the sunset, their hands clasped and their hearts full, rich beyond measure in all the ways that count.